Welcome back. I hope you had a good break. And before I bring up our next panel, I just want to make one announcement or comment. There's been a lot of interest in all the presentations during this conference, so we would love to be able to make them available to the students here, but also on our website. So if that is possible, if you have a presentation you're presented here, please let us know if that is possible to make them available to the audience here as well on our website. I'll talk to you all over the course of the day, so thank you very much. At any rate, so we'll get to our next panel, which is moving beyond low Earth orbit, what missions can be accomplished in the next 10 to 20 years. And moderating this panel is Mike Raftery from Boeing. He's the ISS Deputy Program Manager. Prior to this position, he's worked in many positions related to ISS, including the Vehicle Director, Avionics Director, and Hardware and Software Integration Manager. Prior to ISS, Mike worked on several launch system development programs, including Sea Launch, the National Launch System, and Inertial Upper Stage. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mike Raftery.
Thank you, everybody. It's an honor to be here and a real pleasure to be in Strasbourg. We've got a great panel this morning. I really enjoyed that last panel of Ulrich's, and I think you'll see similar kinds of things here, but the purpose of this panel is really to look forward even more in time, and this is sort of our big picture, long-reaching panel. The objective is 10 to 20 years, and so just as in a way of introduction, I'm going to come back to this chart in a second. I want to go back to something yesterday that Pete Warden talked about during the luncheon. He talked about singularity a little bit. And so this is sort of just to get us thinking big, long-term, big picture. This is a chart. This isn't the same chart that Pete used yesterday, but it's a similar kind of a chart. And I sort of conscripted it. Most of these kinds of charts on singularity are focused on Moore's law and the expansion of computer technology to the point where it starts to overtake biological computing capability, so the human brain ultimately. And what I did is at the bottom here, hopefully you can see, I kind of put in some of our major events, the first flight of humans, the first time humans went into space, permanent habitation for humans in space. I'm claiming that milestone now. And of course, you can put any of these kinds of events that you want to think about that are important, but the real point of this chart is, if you look somewhere about in the middle of this chart, humans as we know them today kind of came into being. And for a very long period of time, not much changed. If you look at this logarithmic scale of time on the bottom, things were very stable for long periods of time in the way that humans live their lives. And in the very near term, recent past, things have changed radically. And that certainly you can maybe take issue with the kinds of events that got picked here, but you can't take issue with this scale down here. This is just time. And there's no question that change is going to happen in our lifetimes and in our children's lifetimes. It's going to happen faster and faster. So with that sort of in mind, we've got a great panel this morning. I'm going to introduce, kind of like Ulrich did, I'll introduce the speakers as they come down to speak. Ask them to stay up there while we're doing our presentations. It's a lot easier to see the presentation from up there if you're down here. It doesn't work very well. So, and then at the end, we'll all come down for a question and answer period to take any questions. Okay, so with that, I'd like to start by introducing Kirk Shireman. Mr. Shireman is the Deputy Program Manager for ISS for NASA. He's responsible for all aspects of the ISS development, sustaining, engineering, and on-orbit operations of the International Space Station. Mr. Shireman is responsible for the overall management and integration of the program, operations elements, including the U.S. and the international partners. Prior to this, Kirk served in several different management roles on the ISS program in the vehicle office, avionics and software, program integration. He began his career working ascent guidance, navigation, and control for the Space Shuttle program. See, on a more personal note, I'd just like to say that and recognize that Kirk is a graduate of Texas A&M University. In spite of all that, his daughter will be attending the University of Texas this fall. So for those of you who know about Texas, that means that Kirk is a real, true Renaissance man. Kirk Shireman.
All right, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I wanted to tell you that I stand here before you in this panel. This panel certainly, and I think this conference in general, is about vision. And I'm really a man divided. I spend the vast majority of my time anchored in today's reality. So I spend, as you might imagine, we work technical details down to how many turns a bolt has and what the gauge of a given wire is, all the way to negotiating common systems ops cost amongst the partnership. And here recently I've spent quite a bit of my personal time looking at what can be done in the future for exploration, in particular how ISS can be used for exploration. And so on one hand I'm anchored in today's reality, and on the other hand I'm certainly looking forward to what is a possible future for human exploration in the solar system. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. A lot of my comments are going to be how you'll see that dichotomy. How do you support exploration and do it though with an anchor in today's reality? So that's not because of any other reason than that's really who I am. I'm a builder more so than a pure visionary, and I hope you'll bear with me through that. Let's see. So let me start off, if I can click here. All right. What is ISS's role in exploration missions over the next 10 to 20 years? First of all, I wanted to tell you that the ISS is comparable in size with other space exploration vehicles. And let me give you an example here. So you can see through time these other vehicles that we're all familiar with that have explored the space. And ISS, while it's on the small end, certainly comparable. So I like that picture. It's really good when I talk to students. They like that one. The reality is the ISS lives deep within the gravity well. You all know that. And it takes a tremendous amount of energy. Joe was just talking about it. It takes a tremendous amount of energy, even in low Earth orbit and where ISS lives its life, to get to as far away as the moon. It takes about 3 kilometers a second of additional delta V. And when you weigh 450 metric tons, you can imagine the amount of energy, the amount of propellant, even at efficient levels that Joe was talking about, whatever, 1800, 2000 seconds ISP, it would be a tremendous amount of xenon to go move something like that, ISS. So today, no in-space stages exist, whether they're chemical, certainly electrical wouldn't exist to go do that. There's really none on the drawing board. And I would tell you that today that nothing exists today, even chemically, to move just one of the modules. One of the modules is roughly 20 tons. A very stripped down module would be about 20 metric tons. Nothing exists today that could move something from ISS out to the moon or lunar space, let's say. So it's quite a daunting task that we're talking about. So ISS in and of itself, the vehicle itself, will not be will not be itself going and exploring, despite what you saw on the previous chart with the Enterprise and those other vehicles. I don't know exactly how they did it, but we're not ready there. We're not there yet. So technically, the next question would be, well, will the ISS be here in 10 to 20 years? That's a really good question. And in fact, I can tell you that the partnership is grappling with this very topic right now. You've probably heard that all the partners have agreed to extend beyond 2020. I'll tell you that while they have, we're still many of the partners in the program are still working with their governments to secure funding to support that. And so, and that's just to 2020, right? And we're in 2012, so that's only 8 years away. But technically, so let's forget the political and the funding for just a second. Technically, the direction that we were given was do not preclude operations beyond 2020. So we're certainly, all the partners are planning on that you could go beyond 2020, and we believe that the structural life, which is really the most critical resource, could go at least to 2028. And in NASA, we're actively working to certify all our structure, all the primary structure, to 2028. And in fact, in the end, there'll probably be additional life beyond that, but we're working towards a date to certify it to 2028. So there's no reason why technically the ISS couldn't exist in that regime. Programmatically, I believe that all our governments, certainly the United States and NASA, the extension will be determined by the utilization and the benefits that have been realized. And in relation to the topic here that we're talking today, specifically, have there been benefits to exploration, and will there continue to be benefits to exploration for having an ISS? And that's really the question I want to talk to you about today. Let's see. So what role does ISS play in exploration beyond LEO? Right? I told you before, ISS is definitely stuck in LEO, and it'll only stay in around for this 10 to 20 years that we're talking about in this panel, if it's having benefits. So what are the benefits? Well, really it comes in 4 major categories, which is human research, which is understanding the health risks to humans. In fact, you've heard some of those this morning that we talked about. Mitigation strategies and actually mitigation hardware, testing and mitigating hardware, and even behavioral considerations. So let me give you an example. We talked about earlier today, they talked about bone loss or just keeping the humans healthy with the exercise equipment. There's things that perhaps you're aware of, but the increased incidence of kidney stones as a result of space flight. These are all well-known and long-known phenomena that occur, but really understanding and how not only the phenomena themselves, but how to mitigate those so that they don't occur if you have some of those things happen when you're in deep space. Again, if you don't control the bone loss and the muscular atrophy, when you get to Mars, as was discussed, you'll have a hard time doing anything on Mars. And in some cases, in some of the strategies that have been talked about, you actually need to refuel your rocket when you're on there. So be key critical activities, or perhaps grow your food to be able to sustain. So all things you need to have humans really well prepared to do. But there are other more recent things that we're learning about. It turns out that your intracranial pressure increases while you're on space, and we're already observing that on the space station. We're seeing significant, noticeable, not only noticeable by the humans, but measurable with equipment, deterioration in vision as a result of a long-duration space flight. And when I say long duration, I'm talking 6 months. And so, does it continue to degrade? Does it stabilize? Can it be mitigated? All those are kinds of questions, and those are the ones that I personally know about today, that I know that we're working on. In terms of strategies and mitigation, we've talked about radiation. I will tell you today, I won't show you any data, but I'll tell you today, our radiation experts say that you could live in the GCR, the background radiation environment today. Humans could today, for 6 months out in deep space, without significantly more risk than they have in low Earth orbit space flight today. So that's possible. But beyond 6 months, it's much more significant. And so when you look at the time durations going to Mars and to other deep space objects, we're going to have to exceed 6 months. So how do we actually adequately protect the humans from that environment? And then behavioral considerations, I wanted to touch on a little bit. I don't know that we've talked a lot about that here, but of course we've had humans live on. In fact, we've had humans who lived on in a space station for over a year, and are fine. They're here on the ground. You saw some pictures yesterday, I know, of one of them. Another guy who's been on space for over a year lives in Star City. In fact, he's the head of the organization there at the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center. So we know that people can live on orbit for over a year. The difference is now it's a much smaller volume, and the distance from home is much, much greater. And so the interaction with the people on Earth is much less. And in fact, the tasking, we're just now grappling with the tasking for the crew members on a long-duration space flight to keep the spacecraft itself healthy might be very, very small. And so the question is raised, well, what are they going to do on orbit for a year or for 6 months? So all those kinds of questions have to be addressed so that we know how to send humans out to deep space. Maturing technologies, that's the one. There's a lot of technologies that we have to have. You'll probably hear a lot of that. I have a chart or two in the later. I'll talk about that. And then systems reliability, I'll tell you personally, this is a huge deal. We've had systems that we thought would work perfectly and even tested in a space environment for short duration. And when we put them on the space station and ran them for several months, we found that there were additional problems, very significant problems we didn't know about until they ran a long time in that environment. And so before you depart and basically set the crew members' lives off, you need to make sure your system is reliable. And then finally, ops techniques and simulation, and I think Mike talked a little bit about that. There's the Mars 500 here on the ground. Perhaps there are things that you could learn additionally in low Earth orbit before you would go off to deep space. So all these things are really will answer, when we answer these questions, will ISS do these things? Are we getting significant benefit? Then we'll say if ISS is around. I personally believe that the answer to that will be yes, and time will tell. How should we begin? This is really my big message to you. There's a lot of ways to talk about exploration, but I would tell you we don't want to begin with a blank sheet of paper. So a lot of the studies have been done about how do you go to Mars, how would we develop a mission to go to the lunar surface. And if you start with a blank sheet of paper, you'll come up with a great rocket, a great lander, perhaps great in-space propulsion, and all of it will close and it'll look wonderful. The problem is that when you do that, you'll have to, the budget constraints, the reality that we live in today won't allow you to get there. In other words, the only way you could get there would be by staying on the ground, not doing anything in terms of human space flight for a significant period of time. And then you would build all these things, spend all your budget for those things, and then go off and do one of these things, whether it's a lunar surface, a near-Earth object, Mars moons. If you start with a clean sheet of paper, that's what you'll end up having to do. So what I would say is what you really need to do is start with the items that you have. And so today, I would say we talk about exploration, and certainly over the next 10 to 20 years, we would start with the largest booster we have, which will be SLS. Crew transportation vehicle made for deep space, which is Orion, and then ISS for the types of things that ISS can support, and there'll be other elements on this chart as time goes on. So we'd start with the things that we already have, build upon those, and we'd phase them so that the developments do not all stack up in time on top of one another, which would exceed our budget constraints. And we have to phase them so that those peaks really, instead of showing a whole series of peaks, it almost makes a more palatable slope to our overall budgetary curve. And then finally, I would tell you, we have to have a steady cadence of human flights. We can't just say, we'll sit on the ground for 10 years. So ISS comes home in 2020, we'll sit on the ground for 10 years and then we'll fly humans to Mars. I don't think that's a sustainable approach. Number one, I think there's many things that we need to learn, perhaps things that we need to learn that we don't know, we have no idea about today. And the only way you learn those things is by continuing to fly. And finally, we need to, more pragmatically, we need to keep the public and our stakeholders engaged. And the only way you do that is by flying. If we sat on the ground for 10 years, in 10 years, they will have forgotten about us. How should we begin exploring? There's lots of things. Kathy, with the Global Exploration Roadmap, I think that's all great framework. Again, the idea I'd like to convey to you is you start with the elements that you have today that exist. We explore together with something that we agree about as an international community, a roadmap, and we proceed along that roadmap, again, starting from where we have, phasing the developments that we have, and that's really what these charts show. I won't go over the individual charts, but these are ideas about how you might phase the developments so that we don't exceed the overall budget constraints, and yet we make progress towards exploration. In fact, significant progress in the next 10 to 20 years. And so where will we be? I would tell you the key is starting where we are today, and yet we have to dream big. And that's what's really exciting for me to listen to the presentations here. There's some really big dreams here in this room and in this world about where we might go, how we might get there. Dreaming big is a big part of it. So we have to have people who are anchored in today's reality, and we have to have people who are big dreamers, and then we have to put them together. And that's really my message to you today. It also depends on our ability to convince the public and political stakeholders of the value of space exploration. And we're all doing that today. I think a lot of us, in fact, this conference and the fact that it's being put on websites and people are twittering about it around the world, I think shows that there's interest. We need to fan those flames of interest and can keep them going. And then finally, I'd tell you, it depends on our ability to explore efficiently and cooperatively. So number one, efficiently, budget is going to matter. It matters today. We all know that. I would contend it will matter 20 years from now. And so it's our job to dream big, and then when we carry out those dreams, to do them as efficiently as we can. But also, I believe that because of the costs involved, it's not something that any country will be able to do on their own. I could tell you that certainly the belief in the United States and within NASA. And the only way we'll do this, the only way we'll be successful is if we do it together and cooperatively, as opposed to everyone doing the exact same thing and we doing it competitively. The last thing I'd like to leave you with, a thought, one of my personal favorites, is a reasonable man adapts himself to his environment. An unreasonable man persists in attempting to adapt his environment to suit himself, and therefore all progress depends on unreasonable man. And I believe that really says it relative to our business and in spaceflight in general. We really have to rely on visionaries and pushing the system to continue to explore. So I can tell you, just in conclusion, that we're working at NASA and, in fact, internationally on some ideas about where we might go. We're not ready to talk about those today, but hopefully over the next year we'll be able to talk about those. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll I guess take questions at the end. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, thank you, Kirk. Next we have Dr. Maria-Antonietta Perino. Dr. Perino is the head of Advanced Exploration Programs at Thales Alenia Space. She's been with Alenia since 1986 and has been involved in the planning for many exploration programs such as ExoMars, Mars Sample Return, and the Aurora Core program. Maria is very active in activities promoting the involvement of young professionals in the space industry. She was a member of the very first class here at ISU. I think that was actually at MIT, and subsequently became a member of the faculty at ISU. She is one of the founders and the president of the ISU European Alumni Association, and since 1989, she's been the Italian liaison for the ISU. Dr. Perino is a member of the Euroscience Open Forum, corresponding member of the International Academy of Astronautics, and vice president of the International Astronautical Federation. Very, very good.
And on a personal note?
Mama Maria. I give you Mama Maria.
And on a personal note, I am Mama Maria for ISU for sure. So, thank you for this nice introduction. Every time I come here and speak in front of my new colleagues from ISU, I feel a big emotion. So forgive me if, as always, I put a lot of my heart and soul in between, hopefully, some technical thoughts. So we didn't really get together before with the other panelists, but it's good that after Kirk, that introduced himself as a real engineer with how can I say, looking straight to Earth and engineering stuff, I like to define myself a strange sort of engineer because I really care a lot about visions. And I agree with Kirk, we have really to put together all the people, not only from, how can I say, a country point of view, a cultural point of view, but also from the possible contributions that people can provide. And what I really believe we miss in this year is the enthusiasm and the will to bring space closer to us. And so this is my little contribution to the discussion today. So, as Mike said, I've been working for more than 25 years in the same company that changed name along the year, but the company is still the same, so Thales Alenia Space in Italy, in Torino. And since I'm not a space station person, since I can remember, I've always been involved in exploration. So I went through the exercise of scenario and architecture analysis so many times that now I really want to see some of those scenarios become a reality. Ah, yes, I have to. I was wondering why it was not moving, because I have to move it by myself. Yeah, yeah, sorry. This is me. And beside all the other ingredients I mentioned before, there are different ways to be engineer. And for sure, and this is for Artemis and everybody else, the first crew to Mars will be a mixed crew of men and women. That's for sure. I already told Diego that to me what was missing the 500 simulation was the lack of a mixed crew. So I truly believe in that, and I have to state it. Yeah. Okay, so in these 2 days I heard very interesting discussions, and I believe that what I can do is just to summarize the main point and bring them in perspective, sharing with you what could be the European contribution to this big puzzle. And in fact, this is the first page of a current study we are performing for the European Space Agency, where you see that we wanted really to deliver the message that to make the big picture mentioned before, we have to contribute with pieces of puzzle that precisely interface each other. So this is why it's so important what Katie and other people are doing, really to bring the different space agencies together, trying to come up with a common roadmap, and from there really welcoming independent even contribution from the different countries. So the question I was asked to consider by my moderator was what could be accomplished in the next 10, 20 years. And so the answer is easy. We have been hearing about that for 2 days. Given the current technology, Kirk, these are the places we can not dream about, but we can seriously consider for the next 10, 20 years. So exploration starts from orbit. Whenever we, how can I say, the International Space Station is really our door to exploration. So we have this beautiful infrastructure. We just have to make the best use of it. And so I don't need to repeat all what we all learned from the previous presentation, how useful the International Space Station can be, not to prepare for exploration, but to activate exploration. So exploration is already having people working in a beautiful laboratory 500 kilometers above our heads. And from there we can continue. And so it makes a lot of sense to think about moon and interesting places around the moon, so low lunar orbit, but also the Lagrangian points, and also all the asteroids discussion that we have heard, and finally our final destination, Mars, and I will show you why Mars, and its moon, Phobos and Deimos. So the picture there, it really summarizes the content of this first page. And why Moon and Mars? Because Moon and Mars are, in fact, the natural evolution. We have learned how to live and work in orbit, and now we want to export. I have also to wear the hat of an industry. We have people that for 20, 30 years have designed and built beautiful pieces of engineering, like the one you can see in this page. This is the heritage of the company I work for. And so, what shall we do with this knowledge? Nothing? That would destroy a lot of important assets. So, it makes a lot of sense, also from a company point of view, to build up from this experience and obviously modify and improve the environment and adapt the environment to our needs. So I fully share the last sentence of the previous presentation. From this point of view, I like to be a very unreasonable lady, just to quote your sentence. And so then, okay, from Leo to Moon and Mars. And we have to ask ourselves seriously, because the overall geopolitical situation is moving fast and is changing fast. So we have to be coherent and mature, how can I say, to set our scenario in the given political and economical situation. So we can dream, yes, but our dreams have to fully respect the needs of humankind, because in fact the taxpayers, people that will provide the resources to make these missions real, are each of us. So we need really to take these decisions carefully and understand, and this is really a message for also the lady who asked the question before, and understand that space, in fact, is a big, important resource for the future of planet Earth. And so we have to ask ourselves which are the long-term goals, and we all agree that these missions are demanding from a technical point of view, from a cost point of view. So it's clear to everybody that we really have to make this mission together. And together, as Bernd Feuerbacher said yesterday, really means together, making room for everybody, not just for the usual friends. There are opportunities for meeting new friends, and I agree with the previous speaker who said that we have to start with what's available, but the list can become longer if you consider assets of other countries, and so that will make the menu of our restaurant more interesting and richer. Okay, the near-term focus, as I said before, shall in fact be the International Space Station, is for sure the need to develop a transportation capability big enough to make the further step possible, because yes, we can launch, how can I say, pieces that will in fact get together in orbit, but those pieces really cannot be too small, otherwise we will never finish. I remember that many years ago I was behind the study presented by Bruno Gardini yesterday, the human mission to Mars. And we were given the requirement to make the design based on chemical propulsion only. And at the end, for a crew of 6 people, and for the typical mission to Mars lasting 6-7 months to go, a little bit more than 100 there, and 6-7 months to come back, we needed 48 launches and almost 4 years of assembly operation in orbit with the given technology. So we can do anything we believe possible, but there is a limit for our design to be realistic, let me say so. And as intermediate steps, we don't need to wait. We can start now by, for example, performing demonstration mission on board the space station. Yesterday somebody presented this concept of testing inflatable technology at the space station, not just by Bigelow. To your knowledge, inflatable technology is also mastered in Europe, for example, in our company. And so, in fact, we don't need to wait. We just need to put together a plan that makes sense in a progressive way. Okay, I had prepared this slide, but I believe I can skip it because the previous presentation was precisely about this topic. So, as we understood before, the International Space Station is super useful for exploration from many different points of view, starting from the fact that there we see, in fact, the typical problem arising from a team level when different people have to perform activities in, I would call it, not a super benign environment, because they are confined, because they cannot, when they are tired, they cannot go home and relax and speak with their family. And so, starting from really the crew, that is indeed the critical ring of the chain, to all the technical demonstration that Kirk explained us before. So I skipped the slide to make it short. So we can ask ourselves, and in fact I don't need to ask this question to the people organizing this conference, why Mars? Because when you start studying this planet, there is no way you fall in love. You cannot avoid to fall in love, because Mars is really a fascinating planet. Is the sister planet to Earth. In our solar system, at least, is the place that, even if it's far, is probably the one we can better adapt to our need. I could talk for hours about the beauty of the surface characteristic. Yesterday we said that yes, with Mars Express, with other American missions, now we know that there is water on Mars, because in fact the camera by the German professor Neumann made a picture of it, that is my screensaver in the computer. So yes, we know that we have Mars, but we have also other, how can I say, witness that water is there, because you see here, maybe it's not so clear, but those are little spheres of hematite. And so this feminine indication, hematite, is used to make rings. And that we like, and hematite form only if water is there. So we knew that water was there even before the picture. And so, yes, Mars, it makes a lot of sense. We have season there, we have an atmosphere. Somebody mentioned that we could terraform the planet. Okay, I am an ISU person, so I went through a lot of discussion, not only from an engineering point of view, but also from other point of view, including ethical point of view. So I really don't know if we have the right to terraform and change another planet. But this would be another long discussion that we could have over lunch. Yes, they are the hematite. Yeah, the little devils. They make the Mars atmosphere interesting. And why the moon? Because the moon can in fact be the next destination of humankind. It's close, it's not too difficult to be reached, to come back. Moon is a very interesting place from a scientific point of view. we can understand a lot about the formation of our solar system. By both studying Moon and Mars, we can understand how to better treat our planet and to avoid to create a new Mars on this planet in a few centuries from now. Moon has a lot of important resources. Is not probably the audience, the proper audience here to mention that, but when we will have depleted the resources on our planet, for example, from an energy point of view, well, we might reconsider the sort of science fiction idea of going there and mining helium-3 to be used on fusion reactor on Earth, for example, or oxygen to breathe and as a propellant, or, for example, silicon to build a solar cell. With the higher efficiency, we heard the presentation by Boeing, who was telling us about these thin films of amorphous silicon solar cell. Well, we performed a study where we demonstrated that it's possible to make solar cells out of the Moon regolith with a very simple facility that the lander by Mark, he will present it, could land in the next years. And then the Moon, for sure, as a validation place for many of the technologies required for mission to Mars. Not all of them, because the Moon doesn't have the atmosphere, but in any case, also approaching Mars to build there an infrastructure will require all propulsive landing. And so I think that landing on the Moon can still provide us with a lot of knowledge that we could use for other missions. So why Mars, why Moon, why Lunar? I believe that there will be another speaker in our panel that will tell you more about this question, why Lunar. But in fact, for example, both from low lunar orbit and, for example, from an infrastructure orbiting in the Lagrangian Earth-Moon point, we could have scientists teleoperating robotic stuff on the lunar surface, for example. We could have people performing new research activity, discovering angles of the sky that we didn't see yet, performing analysis from a comfortable space station without the need to be down on the lunar surface, for example. And why not? It could be, I'm not a fan of this idea from an engineering point of view, but a Lagrangian point could also be regarded as an important transportation node when the frequency of the trips to Mars and to Neos will be big enough to justify this type of transportation node around the Moon. Why Neo? For different reasons. Starting with the knowledge that is always the starting engine of each of us. We want to know more in any field. We are humans are curious people, and so to know better the asteroid. Those have been divided in different classes. So asteroid can also provide a lot of different interesting resources, but we shall learn and know them better also for security reasons, to protect our planet, for example, from impact, and to understand how we could act in case one of those pieces of rocks could come too close to our planet. And so the story here is that we shall in fact look at the synergies between robotic near-term mission and mission involving people, little bit, I don't want to call them far future, just few years more into the future with respect to the robotic mission, and use the robotic mission to prepare the missions that will follow with people. What do we do in Europe? We've been involved now for a few years in different studies about scenarios and architecture for the European Space Agency. And the current one sees the two typical big consortia. The real good one is the one led by Thales Alenia Space. The other one that tries to do its best is led by Astrium people, by my friend Mark, he will tell you later. No, seriously speaking, we are very happy and proud of the output of this study, because we dream, but we dream, how can I say, we dream a future that we believe we can contribute to with the asset we have in Europe. And so we consider different scenarios. First of all, looking into our pocket. How much money do we have? So with the given NASA budget devoted to exploration, we have to be realistic and we cannot go too far. So some of our scenarios took into account, for example, really to focus on the International Space Station and to validate their technology. So we propose some demonstration mission. For example, one demo mission we propose as a company is precisely to validate an inflatable module attached to one of the many modules that our company built, for example, a logistic or a node. Then we can still believe that with the current ESA budget we can contribute to lunar exploration, and in fact Astrium, I have to say, and other companies is heavily involved, and that will be part of your discussion, in the development of a lunar cargo lander. We also could still make to a demo mission to an asteroid, and this is of high interest for our company. We like to think about houses in space, houses and laboratories, so pressurized module. And so we design different solutions for long-term habitat, the first one being without people, but being there precisely to study the problem of, for example, the radiation when a facility is outside the Van Allen belt, just to mention. And then, if we can be optimistic and hope that the ESA budget will increase, then we could dare to imagine for Europe also a step into the development of transportation capability for people, or missions to, for example, Mars Moon. I'm not giving here the details of this scenario, but, sorry, in the last chart you will see a summary of the possible European contribution to the big picture. So what do we need to do? We need to develop a consensus. I truly believe that the decision we will take about the next human destination will be an important decision. So it's better to take few more months, not years, thinking about what really to do next, but to be serious, because we need to extend, how can I say, the unique demonstration that the space station gives to humankind about the possibility to cooperate at international level in a very peaceful way, and extend it to future mission in space. So I tend to agree with, for example, Chris Salaberga, that mentioned that we shall really carry on this example of cooperation and building up something together. So the decision what to do next will highly depend on the priority at budget level. Will human exploration retain a priority position, or robotic scientific mission will have that position. So depending on that, I believe that ESEX will put together a coherent roadmap. And you can read all the other stuff. I already mentioned this point. In fact, this is a good opportunity to strengthen existing collaboration and to develop new one, and to start doing that very soon with some technology demonstration mission. So, to cut it short, when I was 8 years old, I remember that it was a big event. We had in Italy only, but all over the world, we had only black and white television. And everybody was excited. Nobody was even speaking in my family. And we were all watching the first the first man landing on the moon. And so really the population was involved. I don't see this interest and involvement when there is a launch to space. So we need to recatch the public attention. We need to bring the young generation back to our business. You won't become rich, but you will be in money, but you will become rich in spirit. And so we have to bring this message. We opened this Congress with these important words by Reynolds. I fully share your opinion. And we need to convince the decision maker. So it's very difficult. It's very easy to speak among us about this type of objective. It's very difficult to have a political high-level guy sitting in the audience. So we have to find a way to really catch the attention not only of the public but also of the decision maker people. And for Europe to become an important partner, I think this is the opportunity to devote a little bit more energy and money in this business. So the question that I leave to all the European, at least in this audience, will Europe be able to catch this opportunity, or we will continue to be behind the important players? And just to provide you with some input for your list, where we have to start from what we have. This is some of the capabilities that Europe could contribute to. So not just Canada for robotics, but also Europe. As I said before, inflatable habitat, but all the rigid pressurized module, for example, the node, the logistic vehicle, and so on. For lunar exploration, we really would like to place one of our pressurized module on top of a chassis and making a beautiful pressurized rover for which we will need the lunar lander a little bit bigger by Astrium and so on. So I don't know how much time we have, but I have a movie about the lander, about the rover. Can we show it? And for Mars, you know that Europe is fighting for the ExoMars mission.
This one, Maria?
Yeah. I like to show this movie because it's the result of a study we performed 2 years ago. And due to the fact that I live in Torino, and you know that automotive and Turin have something in common, so beside the typical companies that work in the space sector, I wanted to have in the team Giugiaro. I don't know if you know Giugiaro. Back to the Future, the car or the movie? The DeLorean by Giugiaro. Okay, so those tires are the results of space engineering and car expert. Is a woman driver, yeah. Is a woman, is an Italian woman driver. but it could be worse with a German man, for sure. And I hope we will have a discussion later, okay? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Maria. Next we have Dr. Mark Kinnersley. Dr. Kinnersley is the Director of Business Development. Just a second. There we go. Dr. Kinnersley is the Director of Business Development for the Orbital Systems and Exploration Business Division of EADS Astrium Space Transportation. Mark has over 20 years' experience in the space industry in a variety of roles ranging from the Ariane 5 development, Technical Director of the Euro Rocket Launch Services, and to his current position. He's a graduate of the University of Southampton, UK, with a BS and PhD in Aeronautics and Astronautics. His current responsibilities include business development as well as responsibility for advanced projects and research and development within the division. The division's projects are mainly centered on human and robotic space exploration, including the Columbus, ISS operations, ATV, lunar lander, and ATV derivatives. Please welcome Mark Kinnersley.
Thank you very much for the great introduction. And by the way, I'm not German, so which is an advantage in a Franco-German company because I'm seen as a neutral person sometimes. But yeah, I mean, my title is business development, but I think one of the things is I think of myself as an explorer because I think we have to have enthusiasm here. Really, it's all about inspirational things, enthusiasm. We forget that sometimes. We try to justify it through useful applications, but sometimes just going there, seeing it. I was at a conference once where somebody stood up and started saying human spaceflight is a waste of money. And I said, well, yeah, that's fine, we should send robots, he said. And I said, well, that's fine, but you're here, why didn't you send a robot? So they are. So I think it's obviously you can do it over Twitter and on the internet. So yeah, it's a great subject, space exploration. We should really have this because it drives the whole space program, human spaceflight and robotic space exploration. I have 2 young kids, and young kids are interested in 2 things basically: dinosaurs and space. Okay, so I don't know too much about dinosaurs, but space, I can bore them all weekend long about that. So if you turn to, go to the next chart, I'm just going to give... Thanks. Right. Just going to give an overview of European contributions there that we could provide in the next 10 to 20 years. I'd like to say that although we are competitors with our friends from Thales, Alenia, we work very, very closely with them in a lot of projects, and in fact we were thinking of having a joint presentation, but I'm sure our management wouldn't have liked that. Because we work very closely in the scenario studies as well on a variety of subjects. But I think we have to start off what we've done, the know-how that we have, and we've got a lot of building blocks in Europe, including the Columbus facility that we did jointly with our Italian friends, Ariane 5 as well, atmospheric re-entry demonstrator, the automated transfer vehicle, and obviously experience in European operations, etc. So this is a business development chart, really, excuse me, it's very simplified, but what I wanted to do really is to show the capabilities that we have in Europe, and basically we've achieved a lot, and we can look at, you know, the glass half full or half empty, but we have achieved a lot. We've got an independent launch system. We've done some re-entry, descent and landing at suborbital velocity. That's why it's dotted. LEO habitat with Columbus and Space Lab, etc. Interplanetary probes, Mars Express, Venus Express, Cassini-Huygens. Deep space habitat, we still have to acquire that capability, but obviously with the LEO experience, that's very good. Landing, obviously, Rosetta Philae, there is a capability we're going to show. Landing on Mars, of course, we've tried it with Beagle, but obviously ExoMars is being developed there. And to be able to rove on Mars as well is very, very important. Ascent, we still have to achieve that capability. Autonomous soft and precision landing is something we're also developing there as well. So we've got a lot of, I say, capabilities that we've done, and we can build on those building blocks without a doubt. So surface operations infrastructure, ISRU, for instance, rovers, that's something we've really got to work on as well. And mobility in space. Now, this chart's quite interesting because a lot of the areas, especially, okay, you've got habitats, but I like to call this mobility in space. The ability to autonomously rendezvous with various objects is extremely important. Of course, there's different types of rendezvous with cooperative targets like ISS with reflectors, or rendezvous with uncooperative targets, potentially large debris objects, etc. But this is a key capability. We've demonstrated it with ATV. Further areas, for instance, Mars sample return will require autonomous rendezvous and capture. So this is something Europe could consider as an area to go down to. I got a picture, hyperspectral image of the moon, because I keep talking to Mars people and they show this red planet and the moon's grey. So to cheat a bit, I've made it colourful. In fact, it's so contentious debate between Moon and Mars. I actually had a hybrid planet called Lars at the last conference. But seriously enough, I mean, if we land on the Moon, okay, we won't use exactly the same engines, but the terminal descent phase is in principle very similar. But I'm talking about the last bit. Obviously the first part's different, but the last bit of the landing, obviously to do collision avoidance is very, very interesting. So if I go to the next chart here, you can see the landers. This is a progression of lunar landers that we're looking at here in Europe, just to give you an idea. Up here you see what we call the ESA lunar lander, which is supposed to land in 2018. So it's a bit too quick for the 10 to 20 year time frame, but knowing decisions, it may slip into that. But certainly it's a very good program. It's using existing technologies here. In terms of propulsion, Europe doesn't have throttleable propulsion. So you can land a small payload on the moon and demonstrate in the next movie I'll show you the landing capabilities. Then you have what you have is here's an Ariane 5 class lander. This actually has several rovers on board, because this can land either logistics on the moon's surface, like cargo 1.5 to 2 metric tons. So I compare it to an ATV for the lunar base, for instance. But in this case here, what you have is you have a radio telescope, a low frequency array radio telescope on the far side of the moon. So you could actually fly this lander to the far side of the moon, land it, and then deploy these very long dipoles of several kilometers. And this could provide a very invaluable experience. This provides an independent capability for Europe, but also is able to fit into a global exploration context. Then if we dream a bit more, then there's a human lunar lander. I doubt Europe will do that alone, but okay, we've had a look at this in the scenario studies, and there are obviously some ideas about how you could team up with different countries to achieve something like that. So maybe I could show the movie. So, like the smiley face logo here, put everyone in a good mood. So this is launched on a Soyuz, so Soyuz class lander. using existing 500 Newton apogee motors. Just doing thermal maneuvers. The engines on the lunar lander are similar to ATV engines. This is done all autonomously, and we're working very intensively on these type of techniques to land in rocky areas of the moon. Anybody wants to do the robot arm, of course, from Italy or Canada, I'm more than welcome for suggestions. So there are some scientific objectives to that mission. We're going to the Aitken Basin, lunar South Pole. I'm not going to go through the scientific reasons. I'm not a scientist, but certainly there's some very interesting objectives, scientific objectives there. The mission is going to be put forward at ministerial conference, so we shall see how it fares with the budgets at the moment. But certainly this type of capability for Europe, developing autonomous, let's say, landing in this case, is a very interesting enabling capability and could be a useful asset for Europe in international cooperation in the future. So I was just saying about the logistics lander. Here you have the logistics lander with the scientific payload, but you could put ISRO pilot plant on there or other equipment. So we're talking here about 2 metric tons of payload onto the lunar surface with an Ariane 5 launcher. And of course, everybody's dream, of course, on the way to Mars, the human lunar base. So just about a bit about deep space, about habitats, tugs, and the resource module. We've obviously got a lot of experience in that area. One thing we could do is to have an AT-derived space tug. I've more or less made this picture up from an ATV. The ATV has 4 panels on it. We are doing intensive studies, actually, again with Alenia for European Space Agency, and I will reveal more details when we are able to do that. But certainly there is an interesting development in that area to have a modernized, maybe slightly smaller ATV service module that could be used for a wide variety of applications. A deep space habitat here, a demo module. Again, you can see here the ATV derived service module, and then the Columbus derived habitat linked here to a US multi-purpose crew vehicle. So this is a precursor mission. I think it's 200 days. And 2 crew essentially. So this has been sized out in the scenario studies, and what we've been doing in these scenario studies is working out how much these things cost and what's possible within the budget envelopes. Again, visits to near-Earth asteroids, etc. Again, this is a deep space habitat with a 3-person crew, 300-day duration. again, been looking at it for European Space Agency, working very closely with them to see what we could do. And again, what you can see here is the obviously the heritage that we're using from all over Europe to develop these sort of modules. So that's really the conclusion of my presentation. I like this chart because it shows our dreams when the Aurora program was first initiated, and we shouldn't forget our dreams, and we should be positive. And as I said, the person there in the spacesuit seems to be an Italian woman, I guess. So please, everybody, let's be positive. We've got, young people entering now, and I think with the end of the shuttle era, it was very sad to go to see the last launch, but we've got it all for us. People love space exploration. We've got to go out there and sell our message. Thank you.
Okay, and our last panelist, Josh Hopkins. Josh is space exploration architect for Lockheed-Martin. He is a graduate of the University of Illinois. His career began in the commercial launch vehicles such as Athenia and Atlas, and he is one of the authors of the AIAA International Reference Guide to the Space Launch Systems. In the past decade, Josh has been working on human spaceflight advanced development, including the early phases of Orion and Altair lunar lander. He is currently responsible for technical development of concepts for human exploration, such as the Plymouth Rock study for exploring asteroids. Welcome, Josh Hopkins, please.
Thank you very much, Mike. This is an abbreviated portion of a much longer set of presentations. We wanted to keep the presentation a little bit short today to leave some time for questions, but if you want more details, we have published a lot more about this in places like AIAA and on the Lockheed Martin website, and I'd be happy to give you more information after the presentation. In the last couple of years, we've put together a sequence of missions as a Lockheed Martin vision for where we might go in the next 20 years. So the topic fits pretty well with the question for this panel, which was what happens in the next 10 to 20 year time frame. I want to emphasize that this is not something that we are directed to do on our existing exploration contracts, so it doesn't represent any secret insight into what is going on in the U.S. If anybody can figure that out, you're welcome to let me know. But I think that it does highlight at least some of the possibilities for what we can reasonably accomplish in a technical sense with some expectation of limited budgets, but still being able to achieve some lofty visions. The basic principle behind stepping stones is that we all want to get to Mars someday, but Mars is extremely difficult. It's something like 1,000 times farther than the Moon, and a human Mars landing is going to require dozens of technologies that we don't have today and won't develop in just a lunar landing. And that single increment, if we just try to go from the Moon to Mars, is too big a step. We have been told at least 4 times in the United States since Spiro Agnew that Mars would be one of our destinations, but we never actually get the money to do that because it is such an intimidating step. So we believe that we need to break that down into smaller increments, individual pieces that we can bite off, that we can accomplish. But those can't just be test flights. They can't just be practice. They have to each be useful missions that accomplish important science objectives and lay the groundwork for exploration. So we've put together a sequence of missions that we think does that. We first asked ourselves essentially, what is only half as hard as landing on Mars? And a good answer is to fly to Deimos. So we would put humans in orbit around Mars, land on one of Mars's moons, and teleoperate rovers on the surface of Mars. And I'll talk more about that in a second. Essentially, that helps you learn how to do the traveling in space half of the Mars challenge and sets aside the landing and operating on Mars half of the challenge for later. But even a trip to Deimos is pretty difficult. So what is less difficult than Deimos? Well, trips to asteroids make a good set of incremental missions that get you from the moon to being able to go to Deimos. There are a number of asteroids that are relatively easy to get to that we can plausibly do with current technology, and that you can incrementally add new technologies as you develop them over the course of several missions. But even a trip to asteroids is a little bit more than we want to bite off as the next step. At the very least, we need to do a couple of test flights to prove that the spacecraft that we're building work. And we probably, for risk reduction reasons, want to do a few things in Earth's neighborhood before we go off into deep space with an asteroid mission. So the proposed first step, or first set of steps, would be to send Orion to the L2 Lagrange point, beyond the moon, as a test flight to prove that the spacecraft works, and also to learn how to operate in the edges of deep space, if you will. So one way to think about this sequence of missions is that our L2 Lunar Farside mission is something that can pretty much be done with the hardware that's being developed today. No major new developments. The asteroid missions require some hardware that isn't being developed today, but almost no new technology, maybe one new technology to make the asteroid missions work. And we incrementally add a few more technologies to the later missions till we get to Deimos, which requires a number of new technologies, and that gets us to the point where we're comfortable trying to start a Mars landing mission. Now, we named our various missions as we were going along. Sort of coincidentally, they came out with a pattern. We started with Plymouth Rock as our asteroid mission, referencing the Mayflower Pilgrims that Pete Worden talked about yesterday. Red Rocks was the obvious name for our Deimos and Mars sample return mission, and that refers to a famous rock formation near Denver. We've also got a rock name for the L2 mission, but we realized since we had this series of rocks that Stepping Stones was the really obvious name for the group of missions. And since I'm in Strasbourg in France, I will mention that as we did that, we were cognizant of the pattern that the French launch vehicle development program in the 60s used, the Precious Stones series of missions with Diamant and Emeraude and so on. So the guiding principle of this was that in order to achieve great things with small budgets, we need to, wherever possible, use the easiest bits of physics we can and take advantage of the things that the universe has laid out for us to make this problem as easy to solve as possible. So I'm going to go through a few steps of how do we make this simple. The first trick, if you will, is to go to Mars when it is easiest to go to Mars, or at least go to the Mars neighborhood when it is easiest. And there are two major cycles that we worry about. One is the orbital mechanics cycle. Mars's orbit is elliptical, so the opportunities that occur every 26 months to go to Mars are not all the same. Some are a little bit harder, some are easier. And the easy ones come in a 15-year cycle. So picking the right year, in this case where those bars are shortest, reduces the propulsion requirements, and it also basically coincides with when the reentry velocities coming back to Earth and actually arriving at Mars are the lowest. So that makes the propulsion problem and the reentry problem easier. The other important cycle is the sun's solar activity. Now, we've talked about radiation a number of times, and I want to emphasize that the radiation we're talking about is the natural environment, kind of in response to the questions from Japan before. This isn't radiation that humans are taking into space. The main risk we worry about are galactic cosmic rays coming into the solar system from the distant universe. These are extremely high energy particles. They're very hard to shield against. But the sun's magnetic field helps us out a lot. And it turns out that the solar activity cycle, the 11-year cycle from solar min to solar max, greatly changes the cosmic ray environment in the inner solar system. So if you go when the sun is the most active at solar max, its more tangled magnetic field is providing better protection against cosmic rays. And you can cut the radiation dose roughly in half by going at that time. So we have a 15-year cycle and an 11-year cycle, and it turns out that those will probably coincide pretty well in the early 2030s. I say probably because predicting the sun's weather is a little like predicting the weather on the Earth. We know the orbital mechanics really well, but there's a little bit of uncertainty in the solar cycle. So if you look at the opportunities in 2033 and 2035, you'll see both the lowest radiation dose and the lowest delta V. And that is an opportunity that will probably not occur again in our lifetimes. So if we want to go to the neighborhood of Mars, I suggest that the early 2030s are a really good time to do it. And that sets the schedule for the rest of the missions that we're going to lay out. So this is how to make it easy to get to the Mars neighborhood, we should also pick the best places to stay while we're there. You could just stay in a high Mars orbit, but you'd really rather land on one of the moons for at least one critical reason. A secondary reason being that they're much more interesting than just floating around in orbit. But the critical reason, the engineering reason, and the medical reason is that those moons also provide you with radiation protection. So if you're standing on one, that moon is blocking half of the sky with 10 kilometers of rock, and that's enough to stop the cosmic rays. So you want to pick either Phobos or Deimos. Now, typically when you hear about this, you will hear the presenter either say Phobos and Deimos very quickly together as if they are indistinguishable, or like most of the presentations you've seen so far, people will say that Phobos is the right place to go. Well, I'm a contrarian. I'm here to tell you that Deimos is the better option, and for a couple of reasons. One is that it is, and many of them relate to the fact that it is farther away from Mars. So one is that because it is farther away from Mars, it is farther out of the gravity well, it is easier propulsively to arrive at Deimos or to depart from Deimos going back to Earth than it is to go to Phobos. A little less obviously, because it is farther away from Mars, Deimos does not get shadowed by Mars as much. So if you want to build a solar-powered mission without nuclear reactors for power, it's easier to do that and operate on Deimos. If your objective is to control rovers or other assets on the Martian surface, you also want to go to Deimos instead of Phobos. Because Deimos is farther away, you can see more of the Martian surface. For example, from Deimos, you have line of sight to the Phoenix landing location in the polar regions, which you cannot see directly from Phobos. And you also, because you're moving much further away and much more slowly, you have line of sight to a given location on the surface for a much longer period of time, a much greater proportion of the day. So if operating assets on Mars is your objective, then Deimos is the place to go. But further, I'll tell you that there's a couple of specific spots on Deimos that we should go to. And these take advantage of the orientation of Deimos. Like our moon, Deimos is tidally locked to Mars. So one face of Deimos points at Mars all the time. Obviously, you want to land on that side. But in addition, unlike our moon, and more like Earth and Mars, Deimos is tilted with respect to the ecliptic. So Deimos has seasons just like Earth has seasons. And if you want to do a solar-powered mission, the trick to take advantage of is that the polar regions of any tilted planet have continuous sunlight during the local hemisphere summer. So, in the upper left here we have, believe it or not, one of the best pictures of Deimos that exists. In the upper right is a digital model we built that in the same orientation here, so you can kind of get a sense of the pointing direction. So south is down, the Mars-facing side is to the right. In the lower left, what we've done is compute the sunlight coverage over the course of the summer season, southern hemisphere summer in this case. And the brightest yellow places in that map have continuous sunlight all summer long. And that's many, many months because Mars has a long year. So if you then look to the lower right, you can see we've combined that sunlight map with the Mars visibility map. And you can see that there's a couple of small regions right here where you would have both continuous sunlight and continuous visibility to the Martian surface. There's a similar point on the northern hemisphere. There's also an interesting spot here. The southern hemisphere of Mars has these two big lobes that kind of protrude out. It's a very lumpy little moon. It's not a regularly shaped world. So that means that this spot at the South Pole itself is actually shadowed by those two lobes much of the time, even during summer. And of course, it's completely dark during the winter season. So we think that spot probably has the coldest average year-long temperatures anywhere in the Martian system. That makes it a really good spot to store cryogenic propellants for a round trip. It also has just a little bit of gravity, which turns out to be helpful for managing those propellants. So that might be a good place to park your return stage. So what you would do essentially is, in the dates I've shown, the years I've shown you here, when we arrive at Mars, it's southern hemisphere summer, you would land at this point first, spend several months there with continuous sunlight. Then during the southern fall season, or the northern hemisphere spring season, that's when Deimos gets shadowed, and that's when you stop having continuous sunlight at the poles. So you take off from Deimos with just a little bit of propulsion, You stay in Mars orbit for a few weeks until it's northern summer. You land at the similar northern site, and you stay there for 10 months of continuous sunlight, continuous Earth line of sight for communication, and then you go home. So you can do a Mars mission with sunlight something like 99% of the time, and none of the eclipses are longer than 90 minutes. So you don't need a nuclear reactor for power. Now, we've talked about Deimos. Obviously, still, this is a difficult mission to do. We want to do some intermediate steps. And in particular, we want to learn how to operate in deep space without going nearly as far away. And the trip to Deimos is very much like a trip to Mars. It's still probably a 30-month mission, which means you need to deal with radiation and microgravity and regenerative life support. We want a simpler deep space mission first. And I said that the asteroids are a good place to do that. There are a handful of asteroids that are so easy to get to that you can go there and come back within about 6 months. Anywhere between, say, 4 months to 9 months among the easy asteroids. But that sort of 6-month threshold is important for a couple of reasons. As Kirk said, that's about the limit of what we safely know how to do from a radiation protection standpoint today. It's about the limit of what we safely know how to do for microgravity. It's about the limit beyond which you need recycling in your life support, but shorter than that, you can actually get by without recycling, or without recycling very much. So you don't have to trust that your recycling ecosystem is reliable enough. Now, unfortunately, there are not very many of these asteroids that are this easy to get to, at least not when you add other factors in, like are they big enough to be interesting, and are they rotating slowly enough that we can safely land there, and so on. So one of the things we've concluded from that is we need to discover more. Fortunately, that's pretty easy. It turns out astronomers are discovering about 1,000 near-Earth asteroids every year. Maybe less than 1% of those are the ones we want to go to, but that still means we're getting a couple of new targets every year. And that's just with the level of effort that we're putting into it today. We could increase that rate much higher with a few $1 million more per year being spent on that problem. This graph here shows you basically the relative populations of 3 different size groups of asteroids and what we know about them. And the scale on the upper left that's a 1,000 asteroid volume unit, which is about how many we're discovering per year. So there are about 1,000 predicted asteroids that are above 1 kilometer in size, and we've discovered almost all of them. Those are the ones that you worry about wiping out civilization. As we get to smaller and smaller sizes, there are many more of those asteroids, and the transparent box here sort of defines the expected population of asteroids. Now, obviously, we don't know how many asteroids haven't been discovered yet, but we can make some reasonably good estimates of that. We do know that we've discovered a reasonable fraction, but still a minority, of the asteroids that are kind of medium-sized, below 1 kilometer, but bigger than 140 meters. And we know that there's a huge number. Maybe it's 100,000, maybe it's 1 million, maybe it's 2 million, we don't know exactly, but a big number of asteroids that are below 140 meters in size, but bigger than, say, 30 meters. And I use that smaller size bound for a couple of reasons. One is it's about the size of the Tunguska impactor, so even the smallest ones here are still big enough to be dangerous. They don't wipe out civilization, but it can be a very bad day in your neighborhood if one of them lands nearby. And we've discovered very few of those in the medium blue box here. And in particular, we've measured the orbits accurately for a very tiny fraction of those. So the best investment we can make today in making asteroid missions easier is to spend a little bit more money on telescope time and track those asteroids better. And we've been working with amateur astronomers and professional astronomers to highlight the ones that are of the most interest to mission planners. Now, as I said, we still want something, at least as an initial practice flight, that's easier than going out to an asteroid. And we have chosen L2 as our preferred spot to test these initial flights. Now, somebody asked yesterday, why in the world would you explore L2? There's nothing there. You're absolutely right. We don't want to explore L2. But L2 happens to be a good place from which to accomplish other things, like exploring the far side of the moon, or like learning how to operate human spacecraft in deep space. So let me talk about the exploration test aspects of it first. But basically, the analogy I would draw is that L2 is a neat orbital mechanics trick, basically. Similarly, geosynchronous orbit is a neat orbital mechanics trick. But nobody sends spacecraft to geosynchronous orbit to say we've been there, right, to explore geosynchronous orbit. But we send hundreds of spacecraft there because it's a really useful way to do things we care about, like observing the Earth. Well, similarly, out of all the various Lagrange points and other orbits we could have picked, L2 just happens to be a really useful way to solve the problems that we have. From an exploration standpoint, we want a mission that tests out the Orion reentry heat shield at lunar-like reentry velocities, or like the velocities that we will see from an asteroid mission. And L2 does that. From the standpoint of learning how to operate in space, we want to go far enough away from Earth that we really have to solve some of those problems, but still be close enough that we can still be reasonably safe. And L2 is far enough away that you can't just use as your abort plan that if something goes wrong, we rush back to Earth quickly, because you can't get back fast enough. So you have to solve some of those questions about what do we do if the hull gets punctured, or what do we do if somebody has a medical problem. This forces you to solve some of those problems, but still in a relatively easy environment. Now, from a science standpoint, L2 is fascinating because it's a good place to operate rovers on the lunar far side. And we've seen a couple of suggestions about missions that could do that earlier. There's two key science objectives on the far side. One is to return samples of the South Pole Lake and Basin. This is one of the oldest craters on the moon, and it would help us understand the impact history and some big mysteries about things that happened in the early days of the moon and the Earth. The other is to put a low-frequency radio astronomy array on the far side. There are things we want to know about the early universe that can only be understood by low-frequency radio astronomy. Things about what happened after the time that the universe cooled down right after the Big Bang, but before the hydrogen gathered into stars and lit up into things we can see with other telescopes. So the only place we can learn about that is on the far side of the moon. Now, in the interests of time, I'll cut short the science lecture there, but I'd be happy to talk some more about that later. So let me close with two images here. One is of a robotic sample return system launching samples back up into orbit. Presumably that little rover here has been driven around under the guidance of the astronauts while it was picking the correct rocks to bring back. But also, let me show you this image of what the view looks like from the northern landing site on Deimos towards Mars. Now, one of the questions people always ask about Mars missions that don't land on Mars is, boy, wouldn't it be awful to go all the way there and not actually land? Well, to put this in perspective, Mars is going to look really huge from the surface of Deimos. If you think about what our moon looks like in the night sky as kind of a reference for the size of something, just Olympus Mons, which is kind of on the limb right there, just Olympus Mons will look 10 times bigger from Deimos than our full moon looks from Earth. So you'll be able to stand on Deimos, look at Mars, and watch weather patterns move across Mars. Look at small craters on the surface. Look at the details of Mariner Valley. So don't feel sympathy for the people who go to Deimos and don't get to land on the surface, because they're going to feel sympathy for us. Okay. I'll close at that point, but we'll be happy to take a few questions before the lunch break, maybe one or two. Okay, just a few? Yeah, very short questions. Okay.
Maybe if we could just grab seats real quick here. I know. Here, Josh. Josh. Oh, yeah. Okay. Very good. No, that's good.
Thank you very much for that. All those presentations are very insightful. I appreciate that. So I have a question.
Just a suggestion. Can you raise your hand when you're asking questions? Thank you, because we can't tell where people are in the audience. Thanks.
Over here. So there's lots of challenges to do what you guys have talked about in the next 20 years or so. What I would like to find out from you is if you had a magic wand, say, and could eliminate just one of the challenges to make what you think we need to do easier, I'd be curious to find out which challenge you would just eliminate, if you could. And to make it more challenging, I guess I'd like to start from the outside and work in. You can't duplicate what the person next to you said. You can pick a different one, but you can't pick that one. I just want to get an insight from each of you what you think those biggest challenges are.
This is better. So I'm going to say radiation. I think the radiological effects on the crew for long-duration missions is something that is going to be a really difficult engineering challenge to solve. You know, we have the magnetic belts on the Earth that protect us. When we get outside of those belts, we're going to have to provide some other kind of protection. And so that's a major challenge that I wish we could just wave away.
I was going to say the same thing, but it's going to get harder. So I don't know. You said challenges, so I'd probably say budget actually. But I would agree. Radiation. So any way you can cut the duration would be something. Advanced electric propulsion, I think, would be a great thing.
That's like 3.
Okay, number 3, I would have said radiation and then transportation. But then, in order, maybe, probably the close of the life support system, because for sure resources will be also a big amount of tons that you will have to carry with you. So I don't want to say autonomy, but better autonomy with respect to the current one.
Yeah, so all the good ones are taken. Throwing mass out there is a huge one, because we can solve radiation. We know how to solve it, really. If you could throw enough mass out there. We just don't know how we could do it with a reasonable amount of mass. But since those are taken, I would say what we need to do is we need to have a way of operating autonomously, because things are, when you build big, expensive, and complex machines, things break. And in this case, because of the limitations of mass and the limitations of, frankly, the speed of light, you're going to have to solve some of those autonomously. So how many spares should we take? What kind of tools should we take? What kind of supplies? What kind of things can be created while we're on there? So all those kinds of things, when you put humans on board, you're going to want to be able to make repairs and adjustments, and you'll have to do them autonomously. So figuring out how to do that, again, within the constraints of time and the ability of humans to be able to keep what they keep in their brain versus what they keep on other machines.
So did you just say you know how to clean radiation? Or did I misunderstand? Sorry.
Well, there are ideas about how you could do it, but it would take a tremendous amount of mass. So depending upon the types of radiation, maybe Josh could talk about this more, but the higher energy particles, as I understand, can actually be protected with like liquid hydrogen. Well, you could protect yourself with liquid hydrogen. We know how to do that. Unfortunately, putting liquid hydrogen around a human is not a very smart thing to do. So it creates other issues. So that's why it's a technical issue. But even if you wanted to launch, if you want to put a bunch of lead around people, you could launch. But lead is a very heavy kind of thing. It turns out with some of this radiation, the higher energy particles, putting lead is not the best thing. It's worse. You get secondary collisions. So some of those problems can be solved with mass. I mean, to me, the first thing is if you could figure out a way to launch large amounts of mass. That's the key, because it makes all the other problems easier to solve. Frankly, I don't see us being able to solve mass. The only way that we talked about here in this conference that I've heard was Joe talking about electric propulsion, and unfortunately, mass. You can increase the mass, but you also significantly increase the time, which is also exasperates the other problems. So all this is difficult, which is why we're here talking about it.
So I'm going to say a slight spin on the budget answer. I'm going to say that our biggest challenge, if I could wave it away, would be politics. We are actually given really quite a bit of money, and we could do great things with it without some of the constraints we have on how it must be spent. Spinning just a little bit on the radiation question, because I know it is of interest. I want to point out two things. One is that the types of radiation we're dealing with in space are very different than what the issues at Fukushima or Chernobyl. So the things we're trying to solve here don't necessarily help. Although the experiences and the effects of those two accidents do help inform the doctors about what the risks are for astronauts when they're exposed to radiation. But the other thing I would say is that radiation is a challenge that's difficult to solve, but that I don't think it's really the biggest problem we have. The question essentially is, if you went to Mars with the technology we have today, your risk of getting cancer later in life might be 1% or it might be 10%, and both of those numbers are not very attractive, but it's not a 50% chance even of getting cancer. Now, if you spent 30 months in zero gravity, your chances of major medical effects are both unknown but really big. So I would say that solving microgravity effects, which is really many different things, maybe that doesn't count as one answer, but I would say that's the biggest technical challenge that I'd like to be able to wave away.
One more concise question.
Yeah, the concise question that doesn't let us all express our opinions.
No one spoke of tether technology for zero gravity, make it into, I don't know, 0.38 gravity. Why?
I could tell. I'll say one thing. Again, I'm the practical guy here. I mean, but our experiences with tethers, at least with respect to human spaceflight, haven't been that successful. So we did succeed in deploying a tether system, but then we lost it, and so it's difficult technologically. It's difficult. You know, when you talk about humans, you have to worry about what happens if things fail. And what are the consequences of that? So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. I would say it's in the trade space, but at least the work that we've been doing, it hasn't been a major solution to any of the problems. And I'll defer to anyone else that wants to.
All right. Well, thank you.
We're all supposed to be back here, and now I have to look at the program because we have only an hour, but no speaker today, so that should suffice. If you could get back here around 2, some of you will have to leave tonight, and I think last flights are about around 6 out of the airport, so we try to wrap it up at 4:30.